Hello, and welcome to All Things Chemical, a podcast produced by Bergeson and Campbell, a Washington, D.C. law firm focusing on chemical law, business, and litigation matters. I am Lynn Bergeson. This week, I had the pleasure of speaking with Dr. Adelina Voutchkova, Director of Sustainable Development at the American Chemical Society, and my colleague, Dr. Richard Engler, Bergeson and Campbell's Director of Chemistry, to discuss the American Chemical Society's much-coveted Green Chemistry Challenge Awards and ACS's Green Chemistry Institute. Institutionally, GCI has grown as the imperative for greener and more sustainable chemicals has increased. So also has the stature and opportunities to compete for the Green Chemistry Challenge Awards. We discussed the Institute's mission and some new opportunities for competing for the Green Chemistry Challenge Awards. Now, here's my conversations with Drs. Voutchkova and Engler. Well, Adelina, I had the pleasure of visiting with you a bit before recording this podcast, and we here at Bergeson and Campbell have long admired your work as Director of Sustainable Development at the American Chemical Society, and of course your leadership at the ACS Green Chemistry Institute. Let's start off by welcoming both you and Dr. Engler to the studio again to talk about the Green Chemistry Challenge Awards and other issues pertinent. So thanks so much for both of you being here.
Always a pleasure, Lynn.
Thank you so much, Lynn. We're looking forward to it.
Well, we know a lot about you, Rich, because you've been here a frequent visitor here to the studio. But let's start off, Adelina, with learning a bit more about you personally. Give us some of your background, how you found your way to the leadership position you now have at ACS, and other aspects of your illustrious career.
Well, I'm not sure about illustrious, Lynn, but I'm happy to give you a glimpse into what drove me to pursue this particular opportunity at the ACS. And again, thank you for the kind introduction. So, just going back a couple of chapters in my life, my path to ACS GCI really began long before my professional career. I grew up in Jamaica, which is, as I'm sure you know, an island. Sustainability is really at the forefront when you grow up with a finite amount of resources and also a finite place where some of the products that are imported into the island can end up. And so it was always, to me, quite apparent that, we didn't have much of a consideration of end of life. All you had to do was look at our local river and see the pollution and trash that it was accumulating from all the imported products. And then, go down the road a little bit to the bauxite manufacturing plant where we had some of our natural resources being exported out and no real consideration to what the economic impact would be once those resources were depleted. And so, that really shaped my challenge going forward as to, how we might be able to apply sustainability in a closed system like the island of Jamaica. And I was always passionate about chemistry. And so it was always a question of how do I use chemistry to do something that could be potentially beneficial to that type of closed system community. And of course, over the course of that education and career, I looked to stay with my conviction that sustainability has to start with chemistry. And so in my graduate work at Yale, I had a sort of pivotal moment. A lab colleague of mine fell ill, and I was working in an organic synthesis lab where we were in contact with various different kinds of metal compounds, organic compounds, but often with very little consideration for how those compounds interacted with us. Because when you're creating new chemistry, you don't know what the hazards of those new compounds are going to be. And you rely on very limited information and health and safety that's available. And so when that happened, it was sort of a profound wake-up call, that a reminder that even as a chemist, we often design and handle molecules without fully understanding what they can do as potential hazards to us. And that set me on a path to then pursue a postdoc, which was really like another Ph.D., I should say, because it was in a completely different field from the organic synthesis and catalysis I had pursued in graduate school with Paul Anastas, who at the time was starting the Center for Green Chemistry and Green Engineering at Yale when I was about to graduate. And he asked that I worked on toxicology, because I told him a little bit about my passion for health and safety. And so that put me on a path to also understand a little bit about how chemicals interact with our body and how we can use the collective knowledge we've gained from the physical chemical properties of these chemicals, from the way they interact and react in a test tube, to be able to design chemicals that are ultimately safe for us. And so that's been a real passion of mine. And so that I carried that mission forward into my faculty career at George Washington. And there I try to build a research lab that try to bridge those two focus areas, both the design of greener processes with catalysis and then the design of inherently safer molecules. And so one of the most rewarding aspects of that work, when I think back, was watching students from one of the fields, from catalysis, for example, try to teach students in the toxicology subgroup a little bit about how their chemistry impacts the other side, and learning how some of the computational tools can be applied, to both reactivity, understanding how molecules will interact in a test tube, but also then extrapolating that to how they react when they are in touch with our bodies, right? When we get a highly reactive compound on our glove, for example. And I think that was impactful to the students, but it was also really impactful to me, that we need both aspects, right? We need to be able to understand the chemicals themselves and also the processes. And yeah, that's ultimately what's driven me to the position that I have today here at the ACS. An opportunity arose at an unexpected moment to take this position, and it was really a life-changing moment for me. I was a tenured faculty member at George Washington. I really cherished my students, my colleagues, and the department, and I still do. And the decision to leave that tenured position and take on this role at the ACS GCI was really pivotal in my career. But I knew that there was a mission of the GCI that really aligned with my values and my desire to try to bridge the different parts of chemistry so that green chemistry could be addressed in a more holistic way. So I'm happy to tell you more about the work of the GCI later.
Sure. No, what a perfect blending of your personal interest and your background. Who knew that growing up on a beautiful tropical island like Jamaica would be so influential and impactful on your selection of choices as a professional? Do you continue to be a research associate a professor at GW?
So I've currently closed my lab, which was an
Okay.
emotionally charged moment for me, but
I'll
I have to
bet.
focus my entire energy on the GCI and its mission. And I think we have a real opportunity to impact many other researchers,
Oh, yeah.
educators, and many industry, as well as the companies within them that I think make this decision worthwhile.
Mhm.
Yeah, so one of the things early on that I realized about green chemistry is too often a chemist in the lab, especially a graduate student in the lab, but it's generally true in people that work at the bench, is the chemist reaches for what's nearby.
Mhm.
They pick the reagent or the solvent or whatever it is because it's there on the shelf. And there's not a lot of intent about why am I choosing this? Are there other alternatives that can be used? So I mean, the Adelina's background sort of brings that. She brings that intentionality
Mhm.
to um, to her approach to chemistry, and that's what green chemistry is about: is getting chemists to think, be more thoughtful, and be more intentional about why they're selecting what they're selecting, and is there a better choice?
Well, Rich, while we're at it, why don't you remind our listeners what your background is in green chemistry? Not only are you passionate about it, but professionally, you've devoted much of your career to green chemistry in one form or another.
Yeah, I joined EPA in late 1997, which was shortly after the green chemistry program was launched at EPA. The green chemistry program grew out of the Pollution Prevention Act of 1990. There were a bunch of a variety of pollution prevention chemistry efforts that grew out of the P2 Act. There was one on alternative synthetic pathways. Can you design a synthesis or a manufacturing method that's more efficient or uses or generates less of a hazardous substance, or uses a less hazardous substance or generates a less hazardous substance? There's also alternative solvents. Can you pick a greener solvent if you have to use a solvent? And the last was designing greener chemicals. Can you design the molecule itself to be less hazardous, so that the idea of designing, so across all three of those areas, you're trying to design the hazard out of the chemistry that you're
Right.
doing. And so the awards were launched in 95. The first award year was 1996. And then the Green Chemistry and Engineering Conference was launched in 1997. And I joined at the end of 1997. And then from there on, from December 28th, I think was my first day at EPA of 1997 to this day, I've been involved in and really excited about the opportunities of green chemistry. It really is an entirely different way of looking at chemistry, and and even now, all these really decades later, there's still a lot of work to be done about getting chemists to change the way they approach, and it's not just companies and it's students, but really across the entire chemical enterprise. Can we be more thoughtful and more holistic in our approach to making our economy more sustainable? Because green chemistry is the science that underlies sustainability.
Well stated. Well, in that regard, and Adelina, the ACS Green Chemistry Institute's mission, and I'm paraphrasing here, is to catalyze the implementation of innovative approaches to chemistry and engineering that enable development across the globe. In reading that and preparing for this podcast, I recognized how broad that mandate is. Can you help us understand more specifically how GCI achieves its mission?
Absolutely. Before I do, though, I have to mention I have the most fond memory of meeting Rich at one of the first
We all
green chemistry
do.
and engineering conferences I attended as a graduate student. And Rich was sitting at the EPA desk, and we were curious graduate students trying to understand how some of these awards were being implemented. And I remember him inviting us to attend one of those next award ceremonies that took place in DC. So Rich, thank you for bringing the early career researchers into the space, because you've seen the entire trajectory of the history of these awards. So it's really great to see how involved you've been and how passionate about the awards themselves and recognition mechanisms and getting companies to nominate these technologies. So thank you for all of that leadership. But let me turn to your question next. I'm sorry, I couldn't resist that, Lynn. But
No, we appreciate that, Elena. We all admire and really marvel at, Rich's continuing passion. Although you've been at it a long time, Rich, your passion for green chemistry has not muted one bit. It's every bit as vibrant and as instrumental in development among our clients and interested others as it was probably 20 years ago.
no, it's wonderful to be able to continue to collaborate with you and with Rich. And in that vein, the GCI has a very broad mission, as you very well stated, but it really reaches across research, education, industry, and equity. And so we look to bridge academia, industry, and global communities to work together towards implementing green chemistry in a meaningful and impactful way. And so what that translates to is, we have to identify how those sectors can reinforce each other in that pursuit of green chemistry. So, we do things like fund and showcase innovation, but we also provide practical tools, teaching resources, and real world incentives. We try to help embed sustainable chemistry into practice through both some of these tools that I mentioned, but also by getting educators to interact more with colleagues in industry, by providing some support to their students, by providing curricular support for educators, and helping them connect with each other, most importantly, building those global networks and helping to grow the next generation of the green chemistry practitioners who will cross all those sectorial boundaries. They may be educators one day, working in industry the next day, and being able to influence policy in a different context. And so we want them to understand all the facets that are critical to implementing green chemistry. So I'll just hone in a couple of those aspects that I think have been really impactful from my outsider's view coming into this position, and now as more of an insider understanding how some of these programs have evolved over the course of the last couple of decades. So Richard,
Sure.
Rich mentioned the 1997 is sort of the pivotal auspicious moment where the GCI was launched from the Green Chemistry Challenge Awards and the first Green Chemistry Engineering Conference. It later became adopted under the umbrella of the ACS in 2001. And one of the key initiatives that was launched was the Pharmaceutical Roundtable, which was the first industry group that really set out to change the way its own members engaged in green chemistry, but then also changed the ecosystem of how its potential partners and stakeholders, like academic researchers, would be able to engage with researchers in industry and also help bring some of that knowledge of the innovation gaps into their labs, be able to solve some of these challenges and bring those innovations back to industry. And so I've seen this group grow substantially over the course of my career as well, when I was first introduced to it back before starting at the GCI. And now it has really extended its membership reach. We have over 50 companies that engage in this group. And we've used this model to also under other industries. We've had roundtables for chemical manufacturing and even oil field chemistry. And right now, the one that is growing substantially is a natural polymer consortium that was launched just a couple of years ago with a few companies that came to us and said, we're looking for pre-competitive collaboration to help address some of the key challenges with implementing natural polymers in a more substantial way across the chemical supply chain and being able to develop some of the applications that can be most impactful. And so that industry engagement, I think, has really been a pivotal part of how GCI's mission translates to the real world. It's not just about the research in the labs. That's also an important part, but it doesn't end there. We need to see green chemistry being implemented in industry, and we need to see what resources industry further needs to help them propagate that integration. So, for example, we're launching a professional development course in fundamentals of green chemistry for researchers, both graduate students, but especially targeted towards researchers in industry who want to have at their fingertips tools for selecting solvents that are more benign, for being able to identify a way of heating their reaction that's more efficient, applying the right catalysts, very practical synthesis and manufacturing based tools that are tied to quantifying how much impact that process has. So that ties to green chemistry metrics, including the process mass intensity type metrics and small scale reaction metrics as well. And so that, I think, is just showcasing the connection between industry and academia, in that we need to be able to improve some of the skill sets of everyone in the chemistry ecosystem, right? From students to professionals who have long left their respective academic institutions and are now fully able to integrate some of these technologies. And then, of course, integrating research from the labs as well back into industry. So this is some of the aspects of the work of the GCI that make me really optimistic and excited as to how we can help continue to engage with industry, listen to what some of the challenges are, and hopefully develop more initiatives that help to address those exact pain points and bottlenecks that they're experiencing.
And I'm sure if any of our listeners had more questions about either the professional development course or toolbox that you mentioned and the Natural Polymer Consortium, that's available on your website?
Absolutely is. And if you sign up for the GCI Nexus newsletter, this first course will be launched later this year, at the end of the year now. We're in December, so we will be sending out information to all of our mailing list.
Rich, you and I were chatting about this recently, but is there a difference between green chemistry and sustainable chemistry? Perhaps, Rich, you might want to take a shot at that first, and then Adelina, if you would comment, I think our listeners would find that very interesting. I've often wondered, is this duplicative or redundant or what?
Well, I think it depends on who you ask.
Okay.
I don't see a lot of daylight between them. I think there are some good reasons that people would rather call green chemistry sustainable chemistry. Um, there's political, especially in Europe. The Green Party is a political party, so is green
Right,
chemistry
right.
associated with the Green Party? So there's that aspect of it. There's also some people that think that green chemistry is not academically rigorous. It's not like real chemistry. Are you?
Really?
Yeah,
That surprises
there's
me.
just there's a different mindset about the term, which is a fair criticism. I see that as an educational opportunity, um, rather than saying, well, let's rename it. But I don't have a problem with the term sustainable chemistry. I cut my teeth on green chemistry, so I'm
Hmm.
a bit defensive of it. I think the most cogent argument I've heard is that green chemistry does not include an economic aspect of it.
Okay.
That somehow green chemistry is just about the hazard, right? The design of chemical products and processes that reduce or eliminate the use or generation of hazardous substances. It's just about lower hazard. There's none of the practicality of getting it. Can you make it work in the marketplace?
Right.
And
Is it
that's an important
competitive?
aspect of sustainability. If it doesn't work economically, then it's not going to be adopted. It's not going to achieve its end. But I think that's embedded in the definition. If you've designed a less hazardous product or process, but it does not get implemented, then it doesn't meet the part of the definition where it's the design of products and processes that reduce or eliminate. If you're not getting to its implementation, your design is not done. You need to go back and do it again to incorporate those more practical aspects of it, the practicability or the economic viability of it. So that's just that. Again, that's my perspective. I know that's not shared across the community.
Hmm.
I don't battle against one name or the other. I just
No, it's
think
just
I think they're fairly synonymous.
Adelina, what is your thought?
Well, I agree with everything Rich says as usual, but I would add to this that I've had to grapple with this, both in the classroom as students were very curious as to how we distinguish these in practical terms, and then as we look to see how these terms are adopted in real practical application. So I think of green chemistry as a scientific and technical toolbox, and sustainable chemistry is the broader system level goal. And so, as Rich defined, there's a set of principles, 12 principles that, still stand to this day that help provide very specific ways that green chemistry can be implemented at the lab scale, at the bench. And then sustainable chemistry has to expand beyond that to consider, as Rich said, the social, the economic, environmental dimensions, the full life cycle. And so, think of green chemistry as the methods, sustainable chemistry as a mission. And green chemistry will always provide us the tools we need, but we need to think about sustainable chemistry, system level outcomes. And so, that means we need to speak to industry, strategy, to global development, to policy, to societal impact. And I think of organizations like the ACS GCI that have to operate at that intersection, right? We have to advance green chemistry, that how, but we have to then enable sustainable chemistry, which is the what is the broader goal. And then we tie that to the UN Sustainable Development Goals as a global aspiration that helps us, have a goalpost, if you will, towards which we want to work that is broader than just even sustainability itself. It includes equity, access, and quality of life for all people on the planet.
That's helpful. It was a useful discussion. One quick follow-on thought: is there a quantitative dimension to what is sustainable? I mean, do you have to meet a certain metric in order to, or is it just it when you see it?
Well, there are many ways to measure,
Right.
and there are a lot of different aspects of it. Uh, and this is one of the challenges of measuring the success of green chemistry or sustainable chemistry is the many different aspects that need to be measured, and can you or how might you weight the different aspects of it.
Mhm.
So if you've found a way for your process to be much more material efficient, but it's less energy efficient, which one right? There may be a
Right.
trade-off there. So there are instances where you have some trade-offs, and there's so many aspects of sustainability besides just reduction of pollution, energy efficiency, material efficiency, land use, and then the equity issues that Adelina brought up. We as the UN Sustainable Development Goals give that goalpost, like that is the goal, but you may not be able to maximize all of those
Sure.
in every decision. But thinking about them and making again very intentional decisions about how do I meet as many of them as I can in what I'm designing, in whether it's a system design or a chemical reaction or a choice that you're making. Use those to guide your thinking beyond just, hey, I got to get this reaction done by the end of the week, or my PI is going to flog me.
Right.
Yeah,
Any comment, Adelina?
that's quite well put, Rich. I think ultimately, as we're trying to grapple with this distinction and the broader goals, we've got to go back to what does it take to achieve those, and how do we measure those at the individual level. So going back to process efficiency, for example, how do we measure process efficiency? What are the appropriate metrics that are specific to that scale of process? If you're doing something on the lab scale, it's not the same as doing something, on a metric ton scale. Going back to hazard, how do we quantify hazard? And of course, toxicologists have provided us many different schemes for being able to do this, but then you have to get quite specific about the application of the chemical that you have in mind, and think about what are the appropriate methods for alternative assessments that speak to that particular type of application. And so again, we've got groups of professionals that have helped us outline these kinds of sub metrics, if you will, right, within each of the components of green chemistry. But I think your point is a really important one, that we do have to be quantitative. It's not sufficient for the market, for the community, to be hand wavy, if you will, or qualitative, because we're held to a higher standard and we risk the reputation of our field if we're not specific and provide quantitative metrics that can speak to why product A might be better in some ways, but maybe not in all ways than product B. So I think that's a message to industry as well, that we should continue to look for ways to be more transparent on our product labels. And that will provide consumers the type of information that they will use to reward labels that are associated with products that really bring additional benefits to the environment and to human health. And there are many ways we can think about doing that, but I know the pharmaceutical industry is also interested in that level of transparency as well, because as you can imagine, looking at the box of a pharmaceutical ingredient, you don't see much about how it was produced, right? Let alone how that impact translates to broader system effects to biodiversity and the like. So we have to continue to have that conversation and continue to connect green chemistry and sustainable chemistry as a goal to what's in sustainability reports for companies that are putting those out, and then what's on product labels for companies that are producing products, and how we communicate that in a way that is not seen as greenwashing. So I am very passionate about quantifying those aspects, as you can hear. But I think it's for a reason that we need to make sure trust in science, which is a major strategic goal of the ACS, continues to thrive and not perish in this very charged political environment.
Let's pivot to the Challenge Awards. A key initiative of the American Chemical Society is its long sponsorship of the annual Green Chemistry Challenge Awards. You both are very passionate about green chemistry, obviously, and both have a long professional devotion to supporting green chemistry, defining it, expanding upon it, and ensuring that others see the societal benefit of green chemistry. Rich, please remind our listeners how you connect to the Challenge Awards over your career, particularly at EPA, and then we'll move over to Adelina to tell us about the coveted awards from your perspective.
Yeah, so when I first started, green chemistry was a major part of my assignment workload. It was, again, relatively new, so there was a lot of growth opportunity there. and EPA needed staff support. So I worked with Paul Anastas and Tracy Williamson. Early on, Mary Kirchhoff, who was GCI director at ACS for a while, Lauren Hine, and then other staff at EPA, Joe Breen, um, and Daniel Lynn, and other folks there that supported the program. Carol Farris, and as a team, we worked together to support the grants program. The EPA was giving grants to um, GCI as well as other institutions and ACS to develop educational materials, or to support the mission of broadening awareness of and implementation of green chemistry. But a key part of that was the awards. The Green Chemistry Challenge Awards, then the Presidential Green Chemistry Challenge Awards, were an opportunity to shine a bright light on um, great technological success in making giant strides towards sustainability. Across the focus areas, the greener synthesis, the greener solvents, and the greener design of greener chemicals, and then specific awards for academic and small businesses. So it was really holding up these examples of what can be done through green chemistry. So it helped reduce that. Well, it helped shine a light on the technological, the scientific rigor,
Right.
but also the benefits.
Mm-hmm.
So it was real, and it formed a suite of technologies that could then be used to build when you're talking about educational materials. Like, here's some examples that educational materials can point to. And so I worked my entire time at EPA. I worked on green chemistry, and I led the program for about a dozen of my years there. And it was one of the reasons that I came here to BNC and ACTA, was to help grow the green chemistry practice. But Tosca's sort of taken on a life of its own, and I have not had quite the bandwidth that I had hoped for to champion green chemistry in a broader way.
Well, you are championing green chemistry. You're
Sure.
always nurturing innovators that are promoting green chemistry, both in the laboratory practices and in product development. Been hugely influential in that regard.
But the awards still are, they're still serving that purpose of, these are the great examples of what can be done if chemists take into account these broader sustainability aspects.
That's great. Adelina?
Yeah, and Rich, like I said, you've been there from the beginning to see it. I didn't have the privilege of seeing the first couple of challenge awards, but from everything I've heard, they were so critical to helping establish green chemistry as a legitimate pursuit for industry. And the way that they were shaped initially by the collaboration between the EPA and the ACS was to really focus on what some of the key industries were and the key types of processes that needed to be improved, to demonstrate how to, if you will, for others to follow in those footsteps. And so we've seen those be real shining examples of not just what can happen when industry innovates, but how that translates to economic impact more broadly, and how that can translate into competitive advantage for those companies. And so we have wonderful examples of companies like Columbia Forest Products, that received an award in 2007 for a soy-based plywood assembly technology, and then went on to really expand that, scale it. Their new products help them compete against influx of imported products, transformed plywood production, and so on. So, I can name many more. Eastman Chemicals has been recognized similarly for their gem technology, which saves energy, and has been critical for improved quality and yield, and their environmental footprint of some of their polymers. We've had Codexis, we've had Merck, we have companies that have won many awards over again and again, and have demonstrated that not only is this feasible, but it's economically beneficial, right? And it can be recognized by the consumers as a way to distinguish the product on the shelf from others, and to demonstrate that there's real benefit long term for the company. to have this type of recognition. And so, yeah, we can point to many different players in many different industries, but what has really stood out to me is how much these awards are cherished. They're like the Emmys of green chemistry.
No, they are.
Although I'm not sure Emmys, Academy Awards, but they're somewhere there. And for the winners of the last few years, when I've had the pleasure of overseeing some of the ceremonies, it's been somewhat life-changing for some of these companies because they've been so passionately pursuing a technology for a number of years. And for their teams to be recognized in this way gives them the real momentum to continue forth and the real recognition that they deserve. And so I think they still play a critical role in how we need to continue to incentivize green chemistry. And I hope that they won't be the only incentives going forward, that we'll continue to strive for other policy-based incentives for green chemistry that leads to sustainability. But for now, we want to strengthen these awards as much as possible, make sure that they're broad enough to recognize the types of innovations in new industries that have sprouted up that didn't quite exist in the late 90s, and that they also embrace that connection between fundamental research and application.
Well, perhaps in that regard, Adelina, you can tell us and our listeners a little bit about how there are even greater opportunities for participants competing going forward. We understand, for example, there are several new categories. Maybe our listeners are unaware of
Sure.
the developments in this area.
Yes, I'm happy to share more about that. So this year, ACS has substantially broadened the scope of the Challenge Awards. We've introduced, as you mentioned, Lynn, new categories on circularity, on energy-related material design, on biomass valorization, and on safer and degradable chemicals. And there are now dedicated tracks for small business, for climate impact innovations, for academic fundamental research. And so what this means is that green chemistry innovation is no longer confined to the traditional pharmaceutical or process chemistry improvements. We now embrace materials, bio-based renewables, which are a vastly growing fraction of the nominations, and even early stage discoveries. So the awards are really opening the door to a much wider, more diverse set of sustainable chemistry breakthroughs. And I would invite anyone interested to take a look at our website, which I'm sure we will feature somewhere in the show notes here, that provides the nomination packet. And there you can see all of the more specialized focus areas that we've introduced to help ensure fair competition, frankly, between companies who might be manufacturing a specialty chemical and those who are manufacturing a pharmaceutical. We didn't think there was fair competition in some of the nominations we'd received in the last couple of years, with a growing number of nominations from some of these new sectors. And so we hope this will help bring up the baseline, if you will, for all of these industries and provide opportunities for recognition.
Perhaps you each could share, in your mind anyway, from your different perches, what it means to be awarded a green chemistry award. I know for me, each year when the awardees are announced, we make a big deal about it here. We issue a press release. We want to make sure the recipients are given their due honor, because being awarded, to me, is a big deal. You get bragging rights. You're being recognized for innovation and contributing to society. But that's my view. What do you think, Rich?
There are a variety of benefits. The publicity is a big part of it. Getting that level of recognition, it provides motivation. It can provide market advantage to be able to claim those bragging rights. One of my favorite days of the year when I was at EPA was calling the winners.
Oh, yeah, I'll bet.
So after the selection was made, and EPA would reach out to the winners to inform them, to let them know that they won, and to start preparing for the award ceremony. When I was running the program, I got to be the one that made the phone call. And it was
What a
a
happy
wonderful
day.
day because people were really excited about it. But one story really stands out, and it was Clark, the pharmaceutical company. They'd been selected for their mosquiticide, their design of a mosquiticide delivery system where the active ingredient, which was actually a previous award winner from Dow AgroSciences, Clark figured out a way to incorporate that into a delivery system so that the mosquiticide itself, which was highly degradable. That was one of the advantages, one of the green chemistry advantages of the AI's design. But it also means that you need to apply it frequently, or especially for mosquitoes, which can lay eggs and breed over a much more extended period. What Clark did is they found a formulation where that mosquiticide would only be released when water is present. So you could put this like in a storm drain. You could put a tablet. Think about like a pool bleach tablet. So you just throw a tablet down a storm drain, and when it rains and there's water there, then the mosquiticide is released by the tablet.
Oh, how cool is that?
And then it prevents the growth of the larvae. So the larvae, it controls the larvae, and so you don't get mosquitoes. It's very, very cool. And they had the chemistry behind it. Looking at it now, it seems so simple, but it actually took quite a bit of
elegant. Right?
It took quite a bit of interesting chemistry to get it to work just right. I called the contact, and I said, "Hey, I'm calling to let you know that Clark has won for this." And she said, "Oh, that's wonderful. Hang on, I want you to tell the CEO." So I called the day that I called. They were having an all-company retreat.
Oh, how coincidental.
To talk about how they're going to further their corporate sustainability goals. And so I got to tell the CEO, and he got to announce it to the company
in real time.
In real time, the timing was absolutely perfect.
Wow.
For that, and so right, they've built this, for Clark and for that group there to have made this a goal, and the day that they're looking at how they're going to do this in the
cosmic.
future to get that. I mean, to this day, I just feel wonderful about being able to make that call at that time.
Your turn, Adelina. What does it mean to be awarded a Green Chemistry Award?
Well, that's a great story, Rich.
It is. It gives me goosebumps.
We've cherished making those phone calls as well. And my colleague Edmund Leb, who runs the program from our side, has had the pleasure of doing this. But, every year we also realize what this not just means for the future of these companies, but, how they can bring back to us a story that both inspires and teaches us how we can evolve as an industry, or as in the GCI sense, as a group of industries. So, pardon me, we had a number of winners that took the opportunity when receiving the awards to comment on what some of the challenges that they experienced were, what their story was of how they got there. And I think that was as is important to the audience and as recognizing the awards themselves, because you could clearly see that we still have a long ways to go in how we regulate new chemicals and how we incentivize these new technologies. And currently, a lot of the companies being recognized are somewhat unicorns in their own industries. They've overcome these challenges with, either with luck and with, a lot of tenacity. But we have a long ways to go in helping to bring that level of incentive for these new innovations. And so what it meant to me to hear these award winners was to appreciate the challenges that they had gone through. And like you mentioned for Clark, Rich, that was thinking way outside of the box and taking a risk, right, on a new type of product that they weren't sure would be accepted by the market probably, and would have the same sort of appeal to consumers. And we've seen that be something that we've seen again and again from some of these winners, that they had to be quite brave and take substantial risk. And the fact that they were being recognized for that technology now substantiated that risk that they took. And so that's been really gratifying to see. And I hope that will carry that incentive forward to other companies as well, to take the road less traveled, if you will, for developing products that are a few steps advanced in their innovation, not just to replace an existing, bad actor chemical, if you will, but to also find a way that we could replace the need for that chemical altogether. We've seen that on the crop protection product side as one of the many examples. We've see that now on the energy materials side, where we have products that obviate the need for other products that we used to need previously. And so I hope this continues to be the case, and we continue to use these awards to really encourage companies to take that risk and hopefully be rewarded for it afterwards.
Yeah, let me throw one more example in.
Sure.
So, uh, Nalco, which I believe is now part of Ecolab, was recognized for a water treatment, not just a water treatment chemical, but a water treatment technology where they would analyze cooling water towers in real time, and they would only inject the treatment chemicals, the corrosion control, the scale control, and the biological control when the system got out of its standard parameter. So it was a very different business model. They still sell the water treatment chemicals, but what they're really selling is the service. And if they do their job well, they don't need, you actually minimize the amount of chemicals. So
Right.
it's hard
Which
to
is the goal.
it's hard to convince the CEO of a chemical company to say we're going to sell less chemical.
That's a great example.
But they took that risk. They developed this very cool technology, and they're basically selling the chemical as a service if they do their job well. Because no cooling company tower, like, they don't want the chemical, they just want what the chemical does in their cooling tower. They want their cooling tower to work well, and this system gives them that service with the minimum amount of chemical additive. So that, changing the mindset about what your product is another aspect of green chemistry that the awards can really shine a light on to say, hey, think about your product
Differently, right? Think outside the box.
We've seen companies that have pushed the frontiers of fundamental research and have also leveraged academic research to then have a stepping stone, if you will, to a new technology. So one that I have to highlight is in the pharmaceutical sector, the use of various types of enzymes to replace what used to be catalytic processes that were in need of organometallic complexes and other organic catalysts. These new enzyme-based catalysts, biotechnology essentially, have allowed us to now have a much more specific chemistry that is very energy efficient, usually much less solvent wasteful, uses water usually is a downside, and in terms of water waste, but replaces organic solvent. And so, for example, Merck has been recognized 11 times by the Challenge Awards, well, overall, but many of those have been due to the development of more sustainable processes that were due to the use of bioenzymatic processes of this kind. And this has been translated to the manufacturing industry as well. We've had a couple of companies being recognized on that front. So just an example of how we can have a new platform technology, if you will, that then just changes the landscape. It's very difficult to compete, for a catalytic process that was traditional organometallic based to compete against these bioenzymatic processes that we can now develop much faster with the use of new computational technologies to be specific for our chemistry. So we also hope that the Challenge Awards help propagate these new platform technologies that can help us take stepwise advances and kind of lift the entire baseline of the industry.
Last question on the awards. The process is, self-nomination, and I think most of our listeners are aware of that, but I'm going to ask both of you, Rich, you first. What makes a strong nomination, and what are judges looking for in a nomination?
So back in the days where I was ex officio to the judges, the discussion around the table, there were a variety of considerations, but the first among equals was the chemistry novelty. Like, does the nomination describe how, what the chemistry challenge was, and how the chemistry that's being nominated is in fact novel. What did you overcome? What did you have to overcome to implement that? That's a critical part. I want listeners to recognize it. This is a technology award. So describe the technology. You are speaking to technologically savvy judges. And so be technical and let them know this is what we struggled with. And this is how we overcame it. They may not know about your specific sector, but they are technical. They're chemists, they're engineers, they're biologists, maybe some toxicologists, but they are technical folks. So describing the technology matters, and then talk about the benefits. And be quantitative as you can, especially if it's already been implemented. If you've seen implementation and you've seen benefits, you've seen waste reduction, you've been able to quantify how much of a circular material you can use, how less hazardous it is, whatever those benefits are. Again, be technical, be quantitative. You do have to be somewhat efficient because the nomination packages are limited. It's not 100 pages.
Yeah, you
It's
can't
8.
go on and on and on, right?
So you really have to squeeze it in there. But remember that the audience that you're speaking to is technical.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's a great place to start, because I can attest to the current way that we put together the judging panels. They include both industry and academic researchers. They're all experts in various fields that relate to the technology being judged. And so one of the challenges we find is making sure that those applications also have some quantitative metrics, figures, references of environmental and economic benefits of your technology compared to incumbents. So I know that's not always easy, but there's always a possibility to have some quantitative aspect to these applications, especially in terms of the processes themselves. And I'll add that one of the ways we've seen potentially exciting technologies, not reach their full potential, the judging, is by not addressing the elephant in the room. So if you're still using a solvent that is undesirable, but this is the iteration of technology at this stage that's you still use the solvent, address that, and also discuss what might be done to further improve that process in the future, and recognize that toxicology will always be an aspect of the nomination judging process that will be evaluated. And so be as specific as you can in terms of evaluating what's known about the hazard of the final product, about its end of life, and potential for biodegradation and biodegradation products. And we recognize that we don't have a complete set of data that would be ideal, but that's what makes a winning technology for us, is a company that has gone above and beyond the basic knowledge and data gathering, if you will, to identify where their product ends up in the environment, what happens to it, and how it might affect people, animals, biodiversity. And so I would focus on that holistic aspect as much as possible.
Well, Adelina, Rich and I have so enjoyed having you on the podcast and learning more about the awards and about the Green Chemistry Institute, and mostly knowing more about you, learning more about you and your professional career. Want to thank you for your amazing contributions to making the world a better place. How can our listeners learn even more about the awards and GCI? There are documents you can point us to, or websites that are relevant?
Absolutely. So, and thank you so much for having me. It's been an absolute pleasure to share a little bit more about the GCI and the awards with you. So, a couple of ways I want to highlight. First, the nomination package is available through the ACS Green Chemistry Institute. So if you type into Google ACS Green Chemistry Challenge Awards, you will land on that correct page. You can also send us an email at gciawards@acs.org. And my colleague Edmund Lamb, who's leading the ACS component of that program, does respond to those emails and does address some requests for personal communication. We've had many calls with potential nominees to make sure that their time is well worth it, because we do recognize how much time and effort it takes to put together this information, and we want to make sure that you have a strong chance of having a successful nomination. And so if you send us an email at gciawards@acs.org, if you have any questions, if you'd like to have a conversation with us about whether your award fits into certain categories, or how you can strengthen to improve your chances, we do our very best to have those conversations in time for the actual deadline for the submissions. And so I hope that you take, if nothing else, away from today's podcast, that we really hope to see your technologies being submitted to this program. We want to make sure they're recognized. And we'd love for you to consider some of the ways that we could help strengthen your nomination packet through interactions with us. So please do not hesitate to reach out to us.
Wonderful. Thank you for that. I'll also urge listeners to look at the GCI 2025 annual report. I just found an awful lot of really useful information and was stunned by how innovative and prolific, you and your team are. So it's also available online. So Adelina, thank you so much for being here. Rich, as always, it's been a pleasure. And thanks for all your contributions to green and sustainable chemistry.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Lynn. And thank you again for having this podcast and sharing this information with your viewership.
Our pleasure. My thanks again to Dr. Adelina Voutchkova and Dr. Richard Engler for speaking with me today about GCI and developments in its Green Chemistry Challenge Awards. Competing for an award has never been more promising. All Things Chemical is produced by Jackson Bierfeld at Bierfeld Audio, LLC. We will be back again soon to further inform and entertain you about all things chemical. Bye-bye.